Hello and welcome to Arts Insights Live. I'm Aishwarya, Marketing and Communication Director at ACG, joining you from Brampton, Treaty Territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Arts Insights Live is an ACG bi weekly LinkedIn Live series featuring candid conversations on trends, data, open positions, and different ideas shaping the arts and culture field. If you're joining us live, we'd love to hear from you. Share in the comments where you're tuning in from, and feel free to share your thoughts on the comment section throughout the session. Today, we are going to be diving into a topic that every arts leader across Canada can relate to: how to build meaningful long term relationship with funding bodies at every level of government. Joining us is Jeff Urbach, Associate Vice President at Arts Consulting Group. Hi, Jeff.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon.
The author of our most recent Arts Insights article, How Canadian Organizations Build Real Connections with Government Granting Bodies. Jeff here has spent decades working inside and alongside government art agencies and knows what it takes to move from simply applying for a funding to building partnerships rooted in trust. Welcome, Jeff. Would you like to share with our audience what is the kind of work you do at ECG?
Sure, of course. And just to unpack a little bit about pre-ACG, of course, I've worked for multiple cities in Canada, notably the city of Hamilton and city of Regina, um, in their community engagement practices and working with arts organizations and in cultural development. And I've worked in the nonprofit arts sector for decades. So I've been an applicant as an individual artist on behalf of arts organizations. And I've also crafted the mechanisms for which government fund arts organizations. I want to also just note in my bio that I did work for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, and so worked alongside Indigenous artists and Indigenous organizations as well. And here at Arts Consulting Group, I work with clients on a variety of projects. As you know, I work in executive search and work in planning and capacity building for organizations. And so happy to have this conversation today about this critical piece and contribute to the discourse around working with government, which I think is, as you said, super vital right now.
So across Canada, arts organizations are navigating changing priorities from like municipal to federal levels. Jeff's recent Arts Insight article reminds us that relationships, not just applications, often make the difference. So, Jeff, thank you for joining us to talk about this topic again. But before we deep dive into the article itself,
Mm.
what inspired you to write about this like right now?
Yeah, thank you. We're at an interesting inflection point, I think, socially, culturally, politically, economically, and have been even pre-COVID, in which there's a lot of rigorous conversation amongst arts organizations about funding, about the support of government in Canada, municipally, provincially, and federally, what that support means and what those demands are. And I think there's a lot of interesting conversation on this topic, and I think it's quite important topic now. And I think there's an opportunity for arts organizations to work more closely with government funding agencies in enacting their priorities, which often intersect with the missions of arts organizations. This isn't mission drift. This is mission expansion. It's actually, ballooning up your mission so that you can become a super vital, sustainable arts organization. So I was really inspired to say something about it. It's not a prescription by any sense, but I think an interesting conversation for all of us.
Absolutely. Your article, in fact, maps the different layers of funding across Canada, in the municipal, provincial, territorial, and like the federal level. So, can you walk us through what distinguishes each level and how organizations can best align themselves with those priorities? Like, for example, at the municipal level,
Hmm.
what does alignment really look like, especially when funding is tied to all the local goals like tourism or inclusion?
Hmm. Yeah, and there's it. It's important to be mindful that in every municipality, this all looks quite different. So different municipalities in Alberta, I mean, they also have counties and municipal districts as well in between the municipal and provincial funding. So there's I want to just be mindful of that there's nothing homogenous about this, that it's actually quite varied. Many municipalities have arts councils, third party agencies which deliver their funding through peer assessment processes. Some do not. Some actually bring the funding inside of the administration, and those decisions municipally are made either by members of administration or as recommendations to council. Um, and so it's those conversations that I think are really important. And the basis of the article in many ways is how to develop relationships with members of city administration where necessary, with even program officers of arts councils, how to become an indispensable organization in your community in the way that libraries are. And so many organizations in the arts work in literacy, just in different ways than libraries do. But libraries are interesting examples of future potential partnerships, very rich territory for arts organizations to work. And an example of when you said, how do you align with municipal priorities around tourism, around economic development is always a municipal priority. Finding those baselines through the plans, policies, and strategies that municipalities have put forward is simple but time consuming. It's both simple in a sense that these are public documents, everyone can read them, complex in the sense that it's time consuming. You have to find the interlapping magistrae there between your strategic plan and mission and that of the municipality.
Absolutely. We love our libraries. Like
That's right.
we look forward to going to events there. So how do provincial and territorial funders like say SAS Culture or the Ontario Arts Council assess sustainability beyond just like the artistic merit in this space?
Yeah, it does vary again wildly. That's important to note. Of course, it's hard to speak just sort of generally, but provinces and territories, of course, are mandated to think within their boundaries and jurisdiction. Tends to be broader. Many of them speak about ensuring proper and effective community engagement, audience development. They need to ensure that there's a sense of equity within the funding, that it's not just all going into one section of the province, that it's actually spread throughout the province in many ways. If we take that as an example, then arts organizations that do touring, arts organizations that reach outside of their small municipality and into other municipalities or other jurisdictions can often do well on a provincial or territorial level, because they are proving that they're serving as a more provincial level agency in some ways. There's an interesting example more locally to me. I'm based in Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of Métis here in Saskatchewan. The Saskatchewan Writers Guild, I think, is a great example where they actually have established offices in both Saskatoon and Regina. And they do that because they really believe in serving the entire province in all of their programmatic activities. I think that's special in a certain way. And they're able to leverage that in their conversations with provincial funders, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk about the big player here then, the Canada Council.
Mm.
They often focus on national reach,
Mm.
innovation, and equity. So, what advice would you give an organization trying to scale up to like that level of support?
Yeah, it's quite complicated because the Canada Council has spent a certain number of years pushing programs and their opportunities through program funding for those who aren't already within operational funding. And so it's every organization kind of has to take those conversations with the Canada Council from where they are. So not every organization has the capacity or the infrastructure to address on a deep level the conversations around the use of digital and technology. But that's okay. I mean, I feel like the shift federally has been that 20 years ago, a conversation through the Canada Council for the Arts would have been around innovation, would have been around how you're pushing the practice and the discipline. Now, I think that's still true, but there's a lot of conversation through the Canada Council, which is about your audience and about the community that you serve. And one of the sort of trademark statements, as an example, through grant writing, is that organizations will sometimes say they serve everybody. I think we're in a place now where you need to unpack that and you need to say, if that's true, how are you serving the IBPOC community? How are you serving people with visible and invisible disability or neurodivergence? In what ways? It's become, I think, really vital for arts organizations to know the community they serve, to explain how they serve them, to what impact, how is that being measured and reported, and if they're going to be expanding their community or audience, in what ways are they doing that and why. I think all of this is, I think there's a lot of rolling about how that's difficult and how it's a big ask of arts organizations, but in some ways it also feels quite vitally important now to think about these things. Canada's a very changing and evolving population of people, and when Alex Sarian talks about the audacity of relevance, a book that many people will have read, um, in a lot of ways, I'm talking about that as well, right? Relevance is a big word. And so arts organizations, I think, can post that word on their wall and think about, particularly at the federal level, because they talk about this, talk to us about the community that you're serving and why this is important. It's peer assessment, it's juried, it's not all programs are decided purely through Canada Council program officers. And the article sort of talks about how vital it can be to establish relationships with those officers, so at least you really deeply understand what they're looking for. These are the folks who are in the room when decisions are being made. They know what it is the peer assessors and juries talk about. They can point organizations often into the correct envelope for funding, where you might not be sure where it should land and where it would compete, if I can use that word. I don't like using that word, but I think it's most suitable in this context.
It's interesting, right? Like how these levels connect. Like organizations can that can demonstrate just community impact locally.
Mm,
Often, all that becomes really competitive when it's in the provincial and the federal level. So that moves us to the next segue. Like you spoke about relationships.
mm,
You made a very powerful point in your article that relationship with funders grows from like intangible things beyond deadlines and reports. It kind of builds on trust. So what does that trust look like in like the real
mm.
terms?
Yeah, and I'm sort of mindful to uplift that I worked on that side of the conversation. So I was the person inside government who had to measure arts organizations in terms of our investment grants to them and where they were, and establish the trust and also measure that. So, organizations, I think, have to be strategic about this, have to be mindful of it, that that trust is part of the currency that you're working in when you're dealing particularly with the municipality in which the funding exists inside the municipality, particularly when it's decided either by administration or city council, that you have to be felt by people to be an organization that will deliver what it says it will deliver when it says it will deliver it. If there are changes, that those will be communicated, and that you're interested in, and this segues into the visibility and the community part of this as well, that you're interested in what's happening in your community, right? That feels kind of almost maybe Pollyannic, but arts organizations, I think, should, like an octopus, have tentacles that reach into all of these spheres in which they say they work. And so, if you're an organization that is interested in the way art contributes to mental health, establishing partnerships and relationships in your community around mental health is a very smart thing to do, so that you have actually a constellation of partners that you can bring forward to municipalities when you talk to them about the difference that you're making in the community. That visibility is so crucial. When administration creates a new cultural plan, as an example, arts organizations should be absolutely plugged into this. They should not just be giving feedback to the cultural plan, but show up as a delegation to city council, talk about why it's important. Um, The same with tourism, the same with economic development activities, the same with urban planning, the same with business development, business improvement districts. Serve on the board of the Downtown Business Improvement District if your arts organization is located in the downtown, right? And that visibility starts backstopping the sense that your organization is a strong community player and is indispensable to what the community is doing. Because we all know that arts organizations have these partnerships. We all know that arts organizations are connected into all these places. Make all of that real, make all of that as visible as you can make it, not just in your grant writing, but by showing up. I know it's time consuming. It's a shared experience inside an arts organization where it isn't always incumbent on the CEO or executive director. It may need to be board members, it may need to be senior level staff. But all of that, if you take it into the body of the organization and make it part of your understanding of what you do to be sustainable in a sense of receiving government funding, I think is important. The storytelling is the other piece that I talk about there, Aishwarya, and it's, the data is validating, but the stories are memorable. And so the numbers are what they are. Many people are, especially now, particularly we can blame social media, but skeptical of numbers and how they're derived and what their source is. And so pairing the numbers with the stories, how it's made a difference in people's lives, what moved from one place to another. So there's a very good example, and I don't want to call the organization out, but a really powerful organization based in Calgary who had a minister come through their space. And they actually brought the artist to that conversation. And the artist spoke to the minister about why they created the work and what the work means to them and what difference they're hoping it makes to people who see the work. And it's such powerful storytelling that the minister just simply couldn't forget all of this incredible information about the power of what those pieces meant. So it wasn't just a label on the wall, it was explained to them. And the province has ended up investing in that organization really significantly, because this is just a smart approach, right? If you're not, in terms of storytelling, bring the right people to the table to tell the stories, I think is part of that.
Yeah, that's amazing, right? I hear you. Storytelling is often that bridge. So
Mm.
when organizations can share both their challenges and wins authentically through this channel, it pretty much builds a huge credibility over time in today's social media world. So that brings us to the next section on building connections at every level. So in this section, you highlight that successful grants often come down to who you speak with. It's not just what you submit. So you talk about how much successful funding comes down to personal contact. What does that building that kind of authentic relationship with a funder actually look like in practice? If you could share.
Yeah, the tip of the spear on that conversation is really for municipalities in which the funding is either decided directly by administration or a recommendation to city council. Because then these are people who and that is a point of itself, which is that arts organizations, and I think this is vital, and I apologize if this sounds pedestrian, organizations, it's critical for them to know who's making the decision, and often they don't. But it's quite a simple question, which is, how is this being decided then? By whom? Is it the manager? Is it the director of the department? Is it the general manager of the division? Who's making this? And then you can get into conversation with those people. You can just, and by conversation, I don't mean necessarily that you're, trying to push people into a decision in support of your organization, but uplifting the awareness of what you're doing and how. And I think what's critical here is being aware of what we're actually operationally talking about. If you submit a 75-page operational grant and 10 other organizations do the same, you're actually asking then members of municipal administration or even peer assessors through an arts council to read 750 pages of material. It's a lot. And so we can all say, well, I talked about this critical thing that our organization is doing in paragraph 6 on page 7, but being connected to the people that they know and can speak to what your organization is doing, they understand, I think is really, really important. Particularly, again, when administration are making these decisions, if you have a strong relationship with those folks, they're going to understand your organization off the page. Many municipalities have either reduced or fully eliminated that arts organizations can do presentations to them because they don't feel they have the time. It's been a really problematic piece because then arts organizations can't, right, enliven what I'm talking about in that way. They have to find other ways. And on the peer assessor side, much of what we have in Canada is peer assessment. It's the most fundamental equitable process we can all think of. It has its flaws for sure. And I think the question sometimes I get is, well, you can't do that with peer assessors because you don't know who they are and you're not supposed to be speaking with them. True. But you can have conversations with the program officers. What is the program officer's role in the peer assessment? And that's different for different provinces, territories, and arts councils. So it's great to take that person out for coffee and ask them what their role is. What's their function? Are they purely a facilitator? Are they a convener? Do they intervene when they feel like a peer assessment isn't actually making a decision based on the values of the organization and they're veering off? Just getting an understanding of that is really important, and elevating for the program officer what your organization is doing and why, and what that grant is about is actually really useful. Because in many occasions, program officers, again, can speak to it then on your behalf in the room. I'm not suggesting that program officers are putting their finger on the scale, only that they can provide context if there's any blurred lines. And that has value. They can also direct you to the correct funding source. Most cities, I have to tell you, many cities, the public servants and the folks who work in culture are all really supportive of what arts organizations do. They want them to succeed. So maybe there's another path. Maybe there's a different grant. The great example actually on municipal levels is the marketing area, which is that sometimes in municipal structures, the marketing area holds the sponsorship program. And so organizations that may not be receiving a grant for a program can receive sponsorship from the city, but that's through a different department. And so that's just one small example of how organizations, through conversation with members of administration, can actually mine all of these other opportunities through business improvement districts who often have programs or funding to do things that really meet this organization's mission, but they may not know. So the dialogue is really critical. It can be time consuming. I've now said that I think 3 times. I like saying it because sometimes organizations hear all of this and think, well, we don't have the time for it. It's about making it a priority. It's about embedding it inside the organization, which I think we're going to talk about a little more. But
Yeah. Now that you said so much about time, I'm just going to pause for a minute and say, for people who are watching, we encourage you to ask your questions in the comments section, which we will take at the end of the session, if we have time, of course. So if not, we will always get back to you with the response in the comment section itself. Back to you, Jeff. Like, let's unpack whatever you said a little bit with related to the relationship to the program officer and actually going through with the grant. There is a fictional example that you've used regarding like stage works in Nova Scotia. Like, can you unpack that a little bit for us and talk to us through how it looks in real life?
Yeah, it was my attempt to illustrate the complexity of putting forward one grant, of which an organization is putting forward many. And there may be steps in there which are provocative and meant to be, which is that I'm hoping the organizations in some way just might be recalibrating how they go about grant writing, and that they're not simply sitting down and writing a grant for a program that they want to do, but that there's actually multiple touch points with the granting organization at the early stage of development, understanding what the strategy is for that funding agency. If you don't want to open up all of their documents and read through all of it and try and find the intersectional pieces, have a conversation with them and simply ask them, right? Where can this program fit? What are the things you'd be looking for out of this program? And then really tailoring that application in some ways. And then the follow-up and visibility piece is really important, that those follow-up reports are vital. They're about building trust. It's your opportunity. Follow-up reports are your opportunity to actually beat the drum and sort of talk about the success of what you're doing, so that that funding agency can see that this had value. This wasn't just funding that went into the ether. And it all becomes part of the last piece, which is the long-term relationship building, right? Which is that you can then put yourself in a position for further success.
Absolutely. It's that's such a useful perspective, treating these relationships with the government like as an ongoing practice,
Mm.
not just another administrative task. It's also something I've seen make a big difference in sustaining momentum across funding cycles.
Mm.
So it's also inspiring here to think that arts organizations are not just applicants, but right now they're co-creators of cultural policy, and they're helping shape how Canada's arts infrastructure itself evolves in a way. So I'm sad that we're reaching the end of the conversation, but still, if you could leave arts leaders across Canada with one takeaway, what would that be?
I would I would say that in in most cases, municipally, provincially, territorially, and certainly federally through those agencies, they want you to be successful. And they, you talked about co-creation, which I really liked, Ashwarya, that particularly at a municipal level and provincial territorial, they know that it isn't for them to make all the decisions programmatically about what happens in society culturally and with arts programs. They need partners. That's the one big takeaway. They want to partner with you so that you can further their strategies and goals. And so I know when I worked for an arts organization one time, by example, the municipality at the time had 5 strategic goals. On all of our grants, we would actually input how we were meeting those goals and in what ways. What were we doing as an arts organization to help them meet those goals? That was part of our grant writing, and was quite successful. So.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and perspectives today, Jeff. And thank you, everyone who joined us for this conversation. If you have any questions, please do leave it in the comment section. We will always get back to you. You can learn more about our services and current opportunities on the ACG website, and reach out to us directly here on LinkedIn as well. We'll be back soon with another interesting and insightful discussion on Arts Insights Live. Until then, be sure to follow us, ACG, on LinkedIn for updates. Thanks again for joining us, and see you next time.